Good morning, Rabotai. Welcome to Breakfast in the Class. Breakfast in the Class today is sponsored in honor of Yitzchak Aaron Guterman, who brings much bright, wise, and loving light to his super fortunate family, friends, and all lucky enough to know him. Hazaku Baruch Yitzchak. Also, today is dedicated, the Breakfast in Class is dedicated in honor of David E. Ash for putting a bigger smile on her daughter's face on Purim, sponsored anonymously. Hazaku Baruch. Also dedicated for speedy and complete refuah shlema for our Rabbanit Chana Farhi Chana Batzima Fega. Please make berachot for her refuah, and as well for refuah shlema for Rabbi Abadi Eliyahu Shimon and Mazal Fortuna, and in Lilun Nishmat Leah Bat Chana, Mrs. Lily Safa for philanthropy, which has reached so many throughout the entire world. And the week of Cobra was dedicated by David Yash in honor of you and your substantial capacity to do good today and every day. My friends, I want to draw your attention to something that we just read on this sign. Someone said something that's very special about Yitzchak Aaron Guterman, that he brings bright, wise, and loving light to his fortunate family, friends, all lucky enough to know him. And that is indeed what I want to speak with you today about, the light that a person brings. Let's quote the pasuk first, because I think the toaster is about to catch on fire again. I'm smelling it. Let's begin. We need a new t-shirt. Okay, let's begin. The pasuk says, after the Jewish people, let's just give a little bit of context. The context is as follows. The Jewish people have sinned with the golden calf. What does Moshe do with the first tablets? Breaks the luchot. What does Moshe do? He breaks the luchot. As the luchot are broken, everyone is shocked. And this mini war breaks out. There's a fight between those that are loyal to the Egel and those that are loyal to God. I mean, it's just wild. Moshe goes up to Shamayim and he begs HaKadosh Baruch Hu for mercy. And after that period of time of 40 days, where Moshe begs God for mercy, God says to Moshe, okay, fine. And Moshe says, Har'eni na'at kevodecha, show me your honor. And God brings him up to the mountain. He covers his face so he doesn't see him when he passes by. But after he passes by, he removes his hand, the pasuk says, and Moshe is able to see he's able to see the back of God, whatever that means. God doesn't have a front. God doesn't have a back. The commentators explain, on some level it means that a person can never know what God is going to do. All we can hope for in life is to be able to see and witness what God has done. That's how the Khatam Sofer explains that what it means, that Moshe wanted to understand and know God's ways. Hashem says no human being can know me because you're living in space and time. You can't comprehend everything that I'm seeing and I'm taking into account from up on high. But achorai, you could see the aftermath, if you will, of my presence. Okay, what happens after that? Moshe is given the second set of luchot. He comes down to the Jewish people, and now I want to read you an interesting pasuk. The pasuk says, and Moshe is with God 40 days and 40 nights. The luchot, Hashem writes on the luchot, and Moshe comes down with the second luchot. Moshe lo yada, and Moshe did not know, ki karan or panav b'dabero ito, that God, that the face of Moshe was shining with light, b'dabero ito, with God, when God spoke to him. Anyway, what happens? Moshe, unaware of the fact that his face is basically a nightlight, Vayara Aharon v'chol b'nei Yisrael, he comes down, Aharon, all the Jewish people see, et Moshe, v'hineh, and behold, Karan or Panav, his face was shining. Vayiru migeshet elav, they were afraid to come close to him. Moshe had this otherworldly glow coming from his face. They didn't know what's going on. What happened to Moshe? Are they going to get punished? Are they going to die if they approach him? They don't know. Vayikra alehem Moshe. And Moshe calls out to them. He calls them close. Vayashuvu elav, and the Jews returned to him, indicating that they had moved back. V'chol nesiim be'edah, and Moshe speaks to them. After that, he tells them what happened to Har Sinai, and then the pasuk shares with us something remarkable. When Moshe would come, Vayichal Moshe medaber itam, Moshe stopped speaking to them. Vayiten al panav mazveh, he put a mask on his face. Okay? What happens afterwards? When Moshe goes to God, he would take the mask off his face, right? And then he would go to speak to the Jewish people, and the people would see it. Pnei Moshe, ki karan, ve'eshiv Moshe tamazveh al panav, ad bo ledaber ito. And so Moshe was basically, had a mask on his face to cover the light. When he was speaking, he would remove it, he would put it back on. but effectively Moshe, I don't know if many of you, if you imagine Moses, imagine Moshe with a face covering, with some sort of balaclava, like they would say in London, a ski mask, right? But Moshe's face was almost perpetually covered. Why? Because there's this magnificent bright light that shines from his face from when he came down after speaking to God. Now the commentators ask a very interesting question. The question is as follows. If Moshe's face is shining because he spoke to God, why is it that it only shines in the second luchot? He spoke to God in the first tablets, remember? He comes down with the first tablets, sees a golden calf, realizes the Jewish people are not worthy of the tablets, breaks the tablets. But at that point, if what caused Moshe's face to shine was the fact that he'd spoken to God, his face should have been shining from the beginning. Why is it only shining now? That's a question that the commentators deal with, okay? And there's different answers as to why this happened. I want to read to you an answer, but then I want to share with you an answer that I think is a very powerful answer for all of us to be able to get to feel. Rabbeinu Bachya writes, U'ma'alata kirun, and this experience that Moshe had, that his face shone, shezacha ba'ata b'luchot shniyot, that he merited in the second luchot, ma shelo zacha b'luchot rishonot, that he did not have at the first tablets, right? Kishama v'ifin re'er Moshe b'nahar. Why? L'fi shekol Yisrael hayu sham matan Torah. All the Jews were present when God gave luchot rishonot, the first tablets. V'kulam edim b'davar, and they were all witness to the fact that God gave those tablets to Moshe. Because they'd seen it with their own eyes. Aval kan b'luchot shniyot, when it came to the second luchot, that now no one was capable of being with Moshe. No one witnessed the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai in the second iteration. Natan lo ma'alata kirun, he gave him this gift of the shining face, in order kedei sheyeh ot li Yisrael al matan Torah, that the Jews should have a sign that this indeed was also from God. How would they know the second time that it came from God? Maybe God was like, you know what, dudes, I'm out. I'm heading over to the Christians. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm going to do a New Testament with some new guys. How did they know that it was legit the second time? And the answer is, God had to therefore show that what they'd witnessed in the first time, which was the tremendous light at Har Sinai, the first time was now again present in Moshe, and therefore it's not that it wasn't present or earned in the first time, it just wasn't necessary in the first time. That's what Rabbeinu Bachya says. But to me, that answer is a beautiful and a technical answer. I want to share with you another approach that's brought down in the commentators, and then I want to draw on what I think is a super powerful lesson that comes from it. The Ora Haim, if I'm not mistaken, writes that what was it that caused, the Dad Zikenim, Ba'alei Tosafot, if I'm not mistaken. He brings another reason. He says that the reason is, if you remember what happened when Moshe went to Shamayim, the Jewish people built a golden calf. Their intention, by the way, was not to worship Avodah Zarah. How do you know that the Jewish people's intention was not to worship idols? Can anyone bring me a proof? I want to bring you an incontrovertible proof. Ready? They make this golden calf, remember? And then what do they say when the golden calf emerges? That is how it came into existence. But what do they say? Ele Elohecha Yisrael asher hotzeticha be'eretz Mitzrayim. This is your God, O Israel, the rabble-rousers. This is your God that took you out of Egypt. What do you mean? You just made that 1 second ago in front of us. We contributed gold in your collection agency, right, to make this thing. Now, this is after the leaving of Egypt. How could this be the God that took us out of Egypt? Not only that, listen to the impetus for the creation of the golden calf. They do not say, God has abandoned us, we need another God. What do they say? Veha'ish Moshe eneno. The man Moshe is not here. So who's going to be the go-between between us and God in heaven? God in heaven is purely spiritual. There's no way for us to relate to him. That's what they felt. So they needed a go-between. In fact, the Sepharim tell us that on a certain level, a person has to be careful. Because sometimes you can take things that are holy and imbue them with a false sense of sanctity. In a certain essence, the idea that we have a Bet Knesset, and that is holy, or that there's a holy place to gather to speak to God. Why is that? It's a human being's way, in many ways, of channeling, of creating a space where they can relate to God. But as far as God's concerned, where is God? Maleh kol haaretz kebodo. His holiness and his honor is everywhere, okay? So the second proof is that they were creating an alternate leader, an alternate intermediary between them and God. And the proof is that what they say is the Ish Moshe is gone. Says the Da'at Zekenim Balei Tosafot. He says another interpretation. Listen to this, it's gorgeous. Lefi she'ta'u, and because the Jews made a mistake with the Egel, v'ratzu lehamid manhig b'mekomo, and they tried to institute a leader in Moshe's place. He'ir hakadosh baruch hu oto miziv shechinato. God gave him a little bit of the divine shine of Hakadosh Baruch Hu's own presence. Leharot lahem, to show them shelo haya manhig ra'ui kamo, that there's no other leader that matches, that quite matches Moshe Rabbeinu. Isn't that magnificent? So second answer is, number one, that the Jews now needed a proof that these second luchot were the same as the first. They came from the same origin source. So the first idea is to prove the legitimacy of the luchot. The second idea is to prove the legitimacy and the irreplaceable nature of Moshe Rabbeinu. Why was it only relevant in the second tablets? It wasn't about the second tablets. It's that in the interim space between those two tablets, the Jews tried to replace him with a golden calf. So God said, Moshe is irreplaceable. This leads us to the last point that I wanted to share. And as I said, this second part, which is not about the Luchot, and it's about Moshe, is the lesson I want to drive home with you today. The third opinion that's brought in the Mefarshim as to what it was that made Moshe Rabbeinu's face shine is the Mefarshim explain that Moshe Rabbeinu's face shone. Why? Because when Moshe went up to Shamayim, and he says to God, Har'eni nat kivodecha, and God says, no problem. You want to see me? You want to understand me? Fine. You can't understand me fully, but you can understand and you can see my back. I'm going to place you b'nikrat hatzur, on the mountaintop. V'sakoti et kapi alecha, and I will cover you with my hand. Again, these are all euphemisms. God does not have a hand. God does not have a front. God does not have a back. It would be apikursut, it would be heresy to say that God even has a shape or a form. But God covers Moshe with his hand, whatever that means. And the third approach in the commentators is that from the touch of Borei Olam, Moshe Rabbeinu's face shone. Because V'sakoti et kapi, because he covered his face, so to speak, there was a moment of interaction between human and deity, between human and God, and that spot, Moshe Karan Pene Moshe, or Moshe's face shone. Clear? My friends, on this idea, and that's why it only happens in the second Luchot, because that only happens in between. In fact, you want to hear something brilliant? It says, and Moshe did not know. How do you not know? Your face is shining like the sun. How do you not realize that? The commentators explain something unbelievable. What does it mean? HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him the second Luchot. Moshe Rabbeinu comes down. He knows that there's a shine. But Moshe Rabbeinu thought it was from the Luchot. The minute he came down, put the Luchot down, Vihine, and behold, Karan or Panav, he realized that the light was coming from his own face. So Moshe only realized it later. That's a second kind of bonus to this last idea. But what I'd like to share is this V'sakotiet Kapi. It teaches us an amazing, amazing lesson. Our Torah tells us that when Moshe begged God to come back to the Jewish people, he begged God not to walk away. Not only did he get God to say yes, but he also got God to say that he would never ever walk away from the Jewish people. But the line that God tells Moshe is beautiful. He says, Pesol lecha shne luchot avanim karishonim. I want you to engrave for yourself 2 tablets of stone, karishonim, like the first ones. And our rabbis see in that an amazing expression. Not just that God said, okay, I give it to you. Not just that, but God actually said, karishonim, like the first ones. The kindness of God is found in that word, karishonim. What does that mean? Our rabbis tell us that when God said to Moshe, I forgive, not only do I forgive now, I promise to forgive always. I promise to forgive again and again. And how does God say it? He tells Moshe the 13 attributes of mercy. Amonai, Amonai, El Rachum V'Chanun. Right? And our rabbis explain, why does it say Amonai? Amonai, with that pause in the middle. You obligated to pause between the two. And the answer the Chachamim give is that God says, I am God before you sin, and I am God after you sin. How many people think that their relation with God is irreparably damaged after doing something that they know they shouldn't? Human beings fall, we falter, we fail, we're fragile. That's our nature. It's our nature to make a mistake here and there. We're not built of iron. We have desires. We have a Yetzer HaTov, yes, but we have a Yetzer Hara that burns like fire inside of us all the time. When you lose your temper, when you get upset, when a person is overcome with desire for the wrong thing, for the wrong person, etc., etc. There's many different ways that the Yetzer Hara lies traps for a human being to fall with his desires or her desires. Hashem says, sweetheart, I was here for you before, but my relationship with you, it's not conditional. I am always here 100% for you. And if there is distance between us, it's not because I left, it's because you left. But if you come back, I'm here. Amonai, Amonai. God says, I'm the same God. It doesn't say Amonai Elokim. I am Hashem of mercy. But then after the sin, Elokim, I'm Hashem of judgment. You know, look, this is what you made me become. I have to judge you now. No. I'm the same God with the same mercy, with the same compassion before and after, if your heart comes back in teshuvah. Pesol lecha. Listen, Rohi, they made the biggest mistake of their young national lives. Pesol lecha shnei luchot avanim karishonim. Go carve 2 new luchot karishonim, but let them be just like, in my eyes, like the first ones. Not just to forgive, but to forget, so to speak. What a powerful idea. So when Moshe Rabbeinu earns this from God, and he asks God, please show me your kabod, what happens? V'sakoti et kapi. God covers Moshe Rabbeinu's eyes with his hand. V'hineh, and behold, karan or. I'd like to suggest, through the path of our commentators, another suggestion here in what God was showing the Jewish people. Rabbeinu Bahya starts by saying that Moshe Rabbeinu deserved the light from the word go, right from the beginning. It wasn't necessary for God to give it to him until later. The opinion of the Dad Zekenim Balei Tosafot, right? He deserved the light before. He was as much the leader in the first instance as he was in the second. They just needed to see that Moshe Rabbeinu was somebody that was irreplaceable, so God made his face shine. But I think the third idea is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted every single Jew to be able to see that the leader that led a nation that was perfect and the leader that led a nation that is imperfect, this leader is also someone that shines. You don't realize this, but there are times when a person's shine and their glow and their success and their Kiddusha is greater after the sin than it was before. The words of Rabbeinu Tam ring in my ear. He says that sometimes a person has what's called Yerida Litzorech Aliyah, a descent for the purpose of an ascent. Now, if you don't know what that means, the way I'll best describe it to you is a downhill skier. I don't know if you've ever seen. They come down the 800,000 foot mountain, and then there's this little dip, yeah? And then there's this little bit that goes up, and then you just see the guy come off. It's majestic. You ever see those guys? They're flying through the air. It's like for a minute, you look at a human being like he's an eagle, like he's a bird. And they always get that shot like against the sky of the guy just like sitting there flying in the air. My friends, the only possibility he has to fly comes from the downward propel of gravity, which is dragging him to the earth as he descends the mountain. He achieves a velocity of such force, of such speed, that when he then hits that curve, what happens to all of that energy, all of that force? It's then transformed from a descent force into an ascent force. When a person is a Baal Teshuvah, what happens to the person's guilt, the person's regret? If a person makes a mistake, they neglect their child, and then the kid comes and the kid says, "Dad, you're never there for me." The pain, the guilt, the regret, the anguish that the father feels actually causes an amazing thing to happen. It's not that he was a zero dad, and now he's starting with no motivation and no momentum. The negative momentum of being a bad dad is now poured into, in terms of desire, in terms of willingness, in terms of sacrifice, in terms of creativity, into being a good dad, into being a good husband. And what the Torah is teaching us here is that the Moshe Rabbeinu that went up before we sinned, he came down and he was great, but he was not this Moshe. But after this mistake, and with true teshuvah, look at where we've risen to now. This idea is not something that you say to make Baalei Teshuvah feel better. It's not feel-good, self-help prattle of the 2020s. It's canonized in the Gemara. The Gemara says, "B'makom sheba'alei teshuvah omdim, en tzadikim gemurim omdim." Complete righteous tzadikim do not stand in the place where a Baal Teshuvah can stand. Why? Because the propelling motion of that desire, which is done with all of the physical. I thought a lot about this. You know why? Why would it be that a Baal Teshuvah is on a higher level than a tzaddik? The tzaddik never did anything wrong. At the best, the Baal Teshuvah could rectify, right, his mistakes. So at the very best, you'd think that a Baal Teshuvah could become a tzaddik gamur. The answer, my friends, many different answers to this question, but I want to share one answer that I think resonates with me very strongly. Many tzaddikim gimurim, they serve God, and they serve God with all of their souls. B'chol nafshecha, b'chol meodecha. But they don't serve God oftentimes with all of their bodies, because they left their body behind. Their body, their spirituality, carries the day. They don't care about their physicality. It's just not relevant to their story. Like the great tzaddikim, you think they ever hit the snooze button on the alarm? The second the alarm came, they jumped out of bed, they're singing Modeh Ani with all the joy. And I can never do that, but, right? So you have people, their physical needs were just unimportant to them. And they poured all of their effort into raising their spirit. But that's only half of a man. The Rasha, who involves only his body in the wrong things, but then does teshuvah on that. The teshuvah now elevates not only his spirit, but the desires of his body as well. And that's why a Baal Teshuvah is capable of standing in a place that a tzaddik gamur is unable to stand. So therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he made Moshe Rabbeinu's face shine. V'sakoti et kapi, he covered Moshe Rabbeinu's face so that he would see the back of God. Not when you walked with God as a tzaddik gamur. But look at what happens when you see the back of God, when you need to catch up to him, because you're now making up for lost time, fixing the mistakes that you made. Karan or panav. And it is I think the challenge of every Baal Teshuvah, every person who's ever had a falling, which is all of us. It is the challenge of every Baal Teshuvah to feel and to recognize what Moshe recognized. Moshe lo yada, he did not know, ki karan or panav, that his face was shining. Behold, v'hineh, behold. How many people come to shul and they tell me, Rabbi, I'm so sorry, I'm trying to say the Kaddish, I can't say it as fast, I don't really know how to read, I don't really come to shul so much, I'm going to start coming now. And they're embarrassed. They're embarrassed by their Kaddish with tripping over words. And I want to explain to them, your broken Kaddish is worth more than my fast Kaddish. The embarrassed nature that you have when you don't know what's going on. You're a successful guy in every other area of your life. And you have to come to shul to feel like you're in first grade, and someone needs to help you with the sidur, and you feel embarrassed, and you don't know, Moshe lo yada ki karan or panav. that in the aftermath of a mistake, right, what happens? In the catching up to God, the person's face shines. It is the Baal Teshuvah that doesn't understand his level, doesn't understand his greatness, doesn't recognize that he thinks he's not as good as, when really he is better than. Makom sheba'alei teshuvah omdim. And tzadikim gimurim omdim. There was once a rabbi who had a thief come to him, and the thief said, Rabbi, is there ever any hope for me? And the Rebbe said to this thief, he says, I'm jealous of you. He says, you're jealous of me? He says, if I want to do a mitzvah, I have to do a mitzvah. I want to do a second mitzvah, I have to do a second mitzvah. He says, but if you did only one mitzvah, the mitzvah of teshuvah, all the millions of sins that you've done throughout your life, in 1 second, if you do teshuvah out of love, out of connection to God, the Gemara says, they turn into merits. I'm jealous of you because in 1 second, your one mitzvah, the mitzvah of kedusha, of teshuvah, could achieve thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of merits. I never had the opportunity of making a deal like that. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen ve'amen.